Daniel had never felt so out of place in his entire life. The marble floors beneath his old sneakers seemed to stretch on forever, gleaming so brightly he could almost see his reflection. Everything around him screamed wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they made him dizzy. Paintings in gold frames lined the walls, probably worth more than his entire neighborhood. His mother, Linda, had been working as the head housekeeper at the Wellington mansion for 12 long years. 12 years of early mornings and late nights. 12 years of making sure every corner of this massive house sparkled. But in all that time, Daniel had never stepped inside. Not once. He was 17 now, and he'd always waited outside during his mother's shifts. Sometimes in the gardener's shed when it was cold. Sometimes under the big oak tree when the weather was nice. He'd do his homework there or practice piano exercises on a piece of paper, imagining the keys beneath his fingers. The guards knew him. The other staff members would wave. But inside was a different world. A world he didn't belong to. Today was different, though. The regular piano tuner had canceled at the last minute, and there was some big party coming up. His mother needed help moving furniture in the grand ballroom, and all the other staff were busy with preparations. So here he was, trying not to touch anything, trying not to breathe too loud, trying to be invisible. "Stay close to me," his mother whispered as they walked through the corridor. "Don't speak unless spoken to. And please, Daniel, don't stare at anything." But how could he not stare? Every room they passed was more incredible than the last. Libraries with walls of books reaching to the ceiling. A dining room with a table that could seat 30 people. Bathrooms bigger than their entire apartment back home. They reached the ballroom and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, letting in streams of golden afternoon light. But what really grabbed his attention was the piano. A beautiful grand piano sat in the corner, black and glossy, looking like it had never been played. It called to him. His fingers twitched. "Let's start with these chairs," his mother said, pulling him back to reality. "Stack them by the wall, carefully." They worked quietly for about 20 minutes, moving chairs and tables, rolling up a carpet. Daniel's mother kept glancing at her watch, anxious. Then they heard footsteps. Quick, purposeful footsteps that echoed through the marble hallways. Richard Wellington swept into the room like a storm. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's mother made in 6 months. His phone was pressed to his ear and he was barking orders at someone on the other end. "I don't care what the florist says, I want white roses, not cream." White. Is that so difficult to understand? He ended the call and looked around the ballroom with sharp, critical eyes. His gaze swept over the furniture, the decorations, his housekeeper, and then landed on Daniel. For a moment, Mr. Wellington just stared. Daniel felt like an insect under a microscope. He wanted to disappear. "Linda, who is this?" Mr. Wellington's voice wasn't mean, just surprised. Like finding something unexpected in his house. "My son, sir." "Daniel, I apologize for bringing him here, but we're short-staffed today and—" Fine. Mr. Wellington waved his hand dismissively. He walked over to the piano and ran his finger across the top, checking for dust. Of course there wasn't any. Linda's team never left dust anywhere. "This party on Saturday," Mr. Wellington said, more to himself than to them. "My daughter's engagement. Everything needs to be perfect. The Hendersons are coming. The Blackwells, Senator Morrison and his wife." He tapped the piano lid. "I need to make sure this instrument is properly tuned. That incompetent tuner canceling on me." He turned suddenly and looked straight at Daniel. Really looked at him this time. "You boy. Come here." Daniel's heart jumped. He looked at his mother, who gave a tiny nod. He walked over slowly, his old sneakers squeaking slightly on the floor. Each step felt like a mile. "Do you know how to play?" Mr. Wellington asked, gesturing at the piano. Daniel nodded. His throat felt dry. "Well?" Mr. Wellington raised his eyebrows. "Play something. I need to hear if this piano needs tuning before Saturday. Just a scale or whatever, you know." Daniel's mother stepped forward. "Sir, he's just a beginner, really. Maybe we should wait for the professional." "It's fine, Linda. I just need to hear the instrument." "Go ahead, boy." Daniel stood in front of the piano like it was a wild animal that might bite. His hands were sweating. He'd played piano before, sure, but never on anything like this. His piano was the old donated keyboard at the community center, with 3 broken keys and volume that cut out randomly. He practiced on that thing every day after his evening shift washing dishes at the diner downtown. He'd taught himself everything. YouTube videos mostly, watched on his cracked phone screen. Classical pieces he'd memorized by listening over and over. He'd never had a real lesson, never touched a piano that wasn't broken or beaten up. And now here was this beautiful instrument, probably worth more than a car, waiting for him. "Today, please," Mr. Wellington said, checking his watch. "I have a conference call in 10 minutes. Daniel sat down on the bench. The leather was soft, not torn like the bench at the community center. The keys were perfectly white, not yellowed or chipped. He lifted his hands and they were shaking. Just play a scale, he told himself. Play something simple and get out. But when his fingers touched those keys, something changed. The sound that came out was nothing like the tinny electronic noise of his keyboard. This was rich, deep, real, pure, beautiful. He couldn't help himself. Instead of a simple scale, his fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. He'd listened to that piece 1,000 times, memorized every note, every pause, every emotion. It was the piece he played in his head when life got hard, when his mother came home exhausted, when the bills piled up, when he felt like giving up on his dreams. And now, for the first time, he was playing it for real. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. His fingers flew across the keys, no longer shaking, but sure, confident. All those late nights practicing on paper, all those hours at the broken keyboard, all those YouTube videos watched until his eyes burned. It all came together in this moment. He forgot where he was. Forgot about Mr. Wellington watching. Forgot about his mother's worried face. Forgot about his squeaking sneakers and his secondhand clothes. There was only the music, filling the enormous ballroom, bouncing off the high ceilings, flowing through the golden afternoon light. Outside the ballroom, the household began to stop. A maid paused mid-polish of a silver tray. The security guard left his post by the front door and walked closer to hear better. The cook came out of the kitchen, wooden spoon still in hand. Even Mr. Wellington's assistant, who'd been hurrying past with a stack of papers, froze in the hallway. And Mr. Wellington himself stood completely still, his phone forgotten in his hand. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes widened. In his long life of wealth and privilege, he'd attended galas at Juilliard, performances at Carnegie Hall, private concerts with world-famous musicians. But this was something different. This wasn't just technical skill. This was raw emotion, pure talent, the kind of gift that couldn't be bought or taught. When the final note faded away, the silence in the room felt almost sacred. Daniel slowly lifted his fingers from the keys, suddenly realizing what he'd just done. He'd gotten carried away. Way too carried away. He was supposed to play a scale, not a whole concerto movement. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not looking up. "I got a bit carried away." Mr. Wellington didn't respond right away. He just stared at the piano, then at Daniel, then back at the piano again. His mind was clearly racing, processing what he'd just heard. Finally, he spoke. And his voice was different now. Not commanding or dismissive, almost respectful. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Which conservatory? Who's your teacher?" Daniel felt his face get hot. He finally looked up at Mr. Wellington, then quickly looked back down at the piano keys. His fingers were still resting on them, and he pulled them back into his lap like he'd been caught stealing. "I didn't study anywhere, sir," he said quietly. "I taught myself." "You taught yourself?" Mr. Wellington's voice rose with disbelief. "That's impossible. Nobody plays Rachmaninoff like that without training. Who's your teacher? Come on, you can tell me." "There's no teacher, sir." Daniel's mother stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "He's telling the truth. He learned from videos and books. From the library." Mr. Wellington shook his head like he was trying to clear water from his ears. "Videos? You learned Rachmaninoff's second concerto from videos?" "Yes, sir." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. He explained how he'd been practicing on an old keyboard at the community center, how 3 of the keys didn't work properly, so he'd learned to adjust, to play around the broken parts, how he'd watch concert recordings over and over, studying the pianist's hands, memorizing not just the notes but the feeling behind them. He told Mr. Wellington about his job washing dishes at Joe's Diner, how he'd finish his shift at midnight and then go to the community center if it was still open. The janitor there, Old Mr. Patterson would let him practice for an hour before locking up. If the center was closed, Daniel would practice on paper, pressing his fingers against a printed keyboard he'd taped to a piece of cardboard, hearing the notes in his head. I listened to recordings, Daniel continued, gaining a bit more confidence as he talked about music. I have this old phone and I download classical pieces. I listen while I walk to school, while I work, before I sleep. I memorize them. I hear them enough times and then I know them. Mr. Wellington was quiet for a long moment. He walked around the piano slowly, looking at it from different angles like he was seeing it for the first time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost kind. Play something else, he said. Please, something different. Sir, really, we should get back to work, Linda started, but Mr. Wellington held up his hand. Linda, please, just a few more minutes. I need to. He trailed off, then looked at Daniel directly. Would you play something else for me? Daniel nodded. This time he wasn't as nervous. Something had shifted in the room. He chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was softer, more delicate. Where the Rachmaninoff had been powerful and dramatic, this was like a whispered secret, like moonlight on water. His fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a 17-year-old boy who washed dishes for a living. Every note was perfectly placed, perfectly timed. But more than that, every note meant something. You could hear longing in the music. You could hear hope and sadness mixing together. You could hear someone who understood what it meant to want something so badly it hurt. When he finished, there were tears on his mother's face. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but they kept coming. She'd always known her son loved music, but she'd never heard him play like this. Not on the cheap keyboard at the community center. Never like this. Mr. Wellington pulled out his phone. Not to take a call this time, but to make one. He walked a few steps away, speaking in low, urgent tones. Daniel caught a few words. Extraordinary. Immediately. Trust me on this. Once in a lifetime. After the call ended, Mr. Wellington came back to the piano. He looked at Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. Part amazement, part calculation, like he was solving a complex problem in his head. I have a friend, Mr. Wellington said. Dr. Elena Vasquez. She's a concert pianist, and she also teaches at the Thornton Conservatory. It's one of the best music schools in the country. She's coming here on Friday. I want her to hear you play. Sir, that's very kind, but... Linda started. This isn't kindness, Linda, this is... Mr. Wellington paused, searching for the right word. This is necessity. Talent like this doesn't come along every day. It would be a crime to let it go to waste. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Dr. Elena Vasquez. He knew that name. He'd watched her performances online. She'd played with orchestras around the world. And she was coming here? To listen to him? I don't know what to say, Daniel managed. Say yes, Mr. Wellington replied. Friday evening, 7 o'clock. Be here. The next 2 days felt like a dream. Daniel went to school but couldn't focus on anything. His friends asked him what was wrong, why he seemed so distracted, but he couldn't explain. How do you tell people that your entire life might be about to change? He practiced every moment he could. After school, he ran to the community center. Mr. Patterson, the janitor, noticed the difference in him immediately. What's got into you, kid? The old man asked, leaning on his mop. You're playing like the devil's chasing you. Something big might happen, Daniel said between pieces. I can't mess this up. You never mess up, Mr. Patterson said with a smile. You just play. That's all you gotta do. Just play. Friday came too slowly and too fast at the same time. Daniel's hands were sweating all day. He kept wiping them on his jeans. His mother had ironed his best shirt, the one he wore to church on special occasions. It was still a few years old and a bit small, but it was clean and neat. They arrived at the Wellington mansion at 6:30. His mother was working, of course, but she kept finding excuses to walk past the ballroom. Daniel could tell she was more nervous than he was. At exactly 7 o'clock, a car pulled up. Daniel watched from the window as a woman in her 60s stepped out. Dr. Elena Vasquez was smaller than he'd expected, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple clothes, not fancy like Mr. Wellington's guests usually did, but there was something about the way she moved, graceful and purposeful, that showed her years of dedication to music. Mr. Wellington greeted her warmly and brought her to the ballroom. Daniel stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. "Elena, thank you for coming," Mr. Wellington said. "This is Daniel, and I promise you what you're about to hear will change your understanding of what's possible." Dr. Vasquez smiled at Daniel. It was a kind smile, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. She'd probably heard a million parents and sponsors claim their child was special. She'd probably been disappointed most of those times. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent. "Richard tells me you taught yourself to play. Is that true?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "From videos and books. And how long have you been playing?" "About 5 years, ma'am. Since I was 12. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. She walked over to the piano and sat down in a chair nearby, settling in like she had all the time in the world. "Play whatever you'd like," she said simply. "Whatever speaks to you." Daniel sat at the piano. His hands weren't shaking this time. He'd decided what he wanted to play. He started with Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically difficult pieces ever written. His fingers flew across the keys, jumping octaves, hitting notes so fast they almost blurred together. But it wasn't just speed. Every note was clear, precise, perfectly articulated. When he finished that piece, he moved directly into one of Bach's Goldberg variations. If the Liszt had been about technical skill, the Bach was about control, about understanding the mathematics and architecture of music. Each voice in the complex counterpoint came through clearly, like different people having a conversation. And then, without pausing, he played something different. Something Dr. Vasquez didn't recognize at first, because it was his. An original composition he'd been working on for months, playing it in his head, writing it down note by note during slow shifts at the diner. It was about his mother, about watching her come home tired every night, about her strength and sacrifice. It was about their small apartment and big dreams. It was about loving something so much you'd do anything for it. When the final note faded away, the room was silent. Daniel slowly turned around on the piano bench. Dr. Vasquez was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Her eyes were wide and she was breathing heavily, like she'd just run a race. She stood up slowly, walked over to Mr. Wellington and pulled him aside. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see her gesturing intensely, see Mr. Wellington nodding, see both of them looking back at him with serious faces. Finally, they came back over. Dr. Vasquez sat down in the chair again, but this time she leaned forward, looking directly into Daniel's eyes. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was shaking slightly, "I've been teaching and performing for 43 years. I've heard thousands of students. I've performed with the greatest musicians of our time." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words were careful, deliberate. "What you have is not just talent. What you have is genius. Raw, unpolished, extraordinary genius." Daniel felt like the room was spinning. "Did she just say genius?" "Richard," Dr. Vasquez turned to Mr. Wellington. "This boy needs proper training immediately. Every day that passes without professional instruction is a day we're wasting this gift." Mr. Wellington nodded slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that. I have some ideas about how to help." "This isn't just help," Dr. Vasquez interrupted, which surprised everyone. Nobody interrupted Mr. Wellington. "This is responsibility." The audition happened 3 weeks later, and it changed everything. Daniel walked into the Thornton Conservatory feeling like he'd stepped into another universe. The building was old and beautiful, with tall windows and rooms that echoed with the sound of music. Everywhere he looked, students were practicing. Violin scales floated down from upper floors. Someone was singing opera in a distant room. And pianos. So many pianos. The audition room was smaller than he expected. 5 people sat behind a long table, all watching him with neutral expressions. Dr. Vasquez was there too, sitting slightly apart from the others. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Whenever you're ready," the man in the center said. He had gray hair and glasses and looked like he'd seen everything. Daniel played for 30 minutes. He'd prepared carefully, choosing pieces that showed different aspects of his ability: technical skill, emotional depth, musical understanding. When he finished, the 5 judges whispered among themselves. Daniel tried not to stare at them, tried not to guess what they were thinking from their expressions. Finally, the gray-haired man spoke. "Mr. Chen, it's the unanimous decision of this board that you be admitted to Thornton Conservatory with a full scholarship, effective immediately." Daniel's legs went weak. He actually had to grab the piano to steady himself. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. But then Mr. Wellington stepped forward. Daniel hadn't even realized he was in the room, standing in the back corner. "Actually," Mr. Wellington said, his voice smooth and confident, "I'd like to offer an alternative arrangement. I'll personally fund Daniel's education, along with his living expenses, a proper instrument for practice, and anything else he needs. In exchange, he'll perform at certain events I'll arrange. Charity galas, corporate functions, that sort of thing. Think of it as a private sponsorship." The room went quiet. Dr. Vasquez frowned slightly, but Mr. Wellington continued before she could speak. "The scholarship from the conservatory is generous, of course, but it wouldn't cover everything. Housing in this city is expensive. A student of Daniel's caliber needs access to the best instruments, the best resources. I can provide all of that." He smiled, and it was a charming smile, the smile of a man used to getting what he wanted. "All I ask is that Daniel represents this investment well. Play at some events. Help me show the world what proper patronage of the arts can achieve." Daniel looked at his mother, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. She looked worried, her forehead creased with concern. But what could she say? This was an incredible opportunity. How could they turn it down? "That's very generous, Mr. Wellington," the gray-haired judge said carefully. "Of course, the decision is up to Daniel and his family." Daniel thought about their apartment. The leaky faucet his mother couldn't afford to fix. The winter when they'd kept the heat off to save money, sleeping in layers of clothes. The scholarship would cover tuition, sure, but living in this city, eating, transportation, books and sheet music, that would all cost money they didn't have. "I accept," Daniel said. "Thank you, Mr. Wellington. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Mr. Wellington replied, and there was something in his eyes, a kind of satisfaction that Daniel didn't quite understand. "I'm investing in a winner. Over the next few weeks." Daniel's life transformed so completely it felt like he'd become a different person. Mr. Wellington arranged for him to live in a small but beautiful apartment near the conservatory. It had high ceilings and big windows, and most importantly, a Bosendorfer grand piano worth more than a car, a real piano in his own space that he could play whenever he wanted. Clothes appeared in his closet. Nice clothes, tailored suits, expensive casual wear. "You'll be attending events," Mr. Wellington's assistant explained. "You need to look the part." His schedule filled up immediately. Classes at the conservatory from 9 to 3. Private lessons with Dr. Vasquez twice a week. Practice time at least 6 hours a day. And then about once a week there was an event. The first one was a charity dinner at a hotel ballroom. Daniel played background music while wealthy people ate expensive food and talked about their vacation homes. It wasn't terrible. The piano was good, the audience was polite, but it felt strange playing while people weren't really listening, just using his music as decoration. "You did wonderfully," Mr. Wellington told him afterward, handing him a glass of sparkling water. The Hendersons were very impressed. They're major donors to the arts, you know. Connections like that matter. The second event was similar. A corporate gala for one of Mr. Wellington's business partners. Daniel played Mozart while executives networked and made deals. A few people stopped to listen for a moment, then moved on to the bar. "This is part of the process," Dr. Vasquez told him during their next lesson, when he mentioned feeling uncomfortable. "Many great musicians have relied on wealthy patrons. Mozart did. Beethoven did. It's how the arts have always worked." "I know," Daniel said. "I'm grateful, really. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm furniture, like a fancy lamp that happens to make sound." Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on the piano keys. "The question you need to ask yourself is whether this arrangement is helping you grow as an artist, or if it's holding you back. Right now you're developing, you're learning, so perhaps it's worth it." But she didn't sound entirely convinced. 3 months into his new life, Daniel hardly recognized himself. He looked different, dressed in clothes that cost more than his mother's monthly rent. He spoke differently, using terms he'd picked up from the wealthy people at the events. He moved through spaces he'd never imagined being allowed into, his mother noticed. She came to visit his apartment one Sunday, bringing homemade food because she worried he wasn't eating enough. She walked around slowly, touching things carefully like she was in a museum. "It's beautiful," she said, but her voice was sad. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, though he thought he knew. "Nothing's wrong. This is what we wanted, right? This opportunity." She sat down on the expensive couch and looked at her hands. I miss you. The real you. The boy who'd come home excited about a new piece he learned. Who'd help me fold laundry while telling me about music theory. Now when you talk, you sound like them, like the people at that mansion. Mom, I'm still me. Are you? She looked up at him and there were tears in her eyes. When's the last time you called just to talk? When's the last time you came home to visit? You live 20 minutes away, but it feels like you're on a different planet. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She was right. He'd been so caught up in his new life, his new opportunities, that he'd let the distance grow. Not just physical distance, but something deeper. He was becoming someone else, and he wasn't sure if he liked who that person was. I'm sorry, he said quietly, sitting next to her. I've been so focused on not messing this up, on being good enough for all of this, that I forgot. I forgot what matters. She took his hand. Just don't lose yourself, okay? All this fancy stuff, these opportunities, they're wonderful, but they're not worth it if you lose who you are. That conversation stayed with him. A week later, at another corporate event, he played a particularly soulless arrangement of Vivaldi while business executives talked loudly over the music. One man even put his drink on the piano, leaving a wet ring on the wood. Daniel wanted to stop playing and walk out, but Mr. Wellington was watching from across the room, nodding approvingly, already imagining the next event, the next performance, the next opportunity to show off his investment. Back at the conservatory, things weren't much easier. The other students knew about his arrangement with Mr. Wellington. They whispered when he walked by. That's the guy Wellington bought, someone said once, not quite quietly enough. Must be nice having everything handed to you. Daniel wanted to explain that it wasn't handed to him, that he'd worked for years on his own, teaching himself, practicing until his fingers ached. But what was the point? They'd made up their minds about him. His only real friend at the conservatory was a girl named Amy, a violinist from a small town who understood what it meant to be different. She'd sit with him in the practice room sometimes, working on her own pieces while he practiced his. They're just jealous, she told him once, when he mentioned the whispers. You're incredibly talented and they can't handle it. Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe they're right. Maybe I did take a shortcut. Maybe I'm not really earning this. That's ridiculous. You think playing for Wellington's boring parties is easy? You think dealing with all his demands is a shortcut? Please, she had a point. Because Mr. Wellington's demands were growing. It wasn't just playing at events anymore. Now he wanted Daniel to pose for photographs with donors, to give quotes to journalists about how Wellington's generosity had changed his life, to attend dinners where he'd be trotted out like a prize, asked to play a piece or two to entertain the guests. Think of it as building your brand, Mr. Wellington's assistant explained. You're not just a pianist. You're a story. The poor kid who made it big. People love that. But Daniel didn't want to be a story. He wanted to be a musician. The breaking point came slowly, like water wearing down stone. 6 months into his sponsorship, Daniel was practicing a Chopin etude when he realized something terrible. He couldn't feel the music anymore. The notes were perfect. 9 months into his arrangement with Mr. Wellington, Daniel received an invitation that would force everything into focus. The conservatory was hosting a student showcase, a chance for the most talented students to perform complete pieces in front of an audience of industry professionals, talent scouts, and music lovers. Dr. Vasquez had recommended Daniel for one of the coveted spots. This is what you've been training for, she told him excitedly. A real performance. Not background music at a party. A full recital where people will actually listen. Daniel should have been thrilled. Instead, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. What should I play? Whatever speaks to you, Dr. Vasquez said. This is your chance to show who you are as an artist. Not what Wellington wants, not what sells at corporate events, you. That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, Mr. Wellington had heard about the showcase and had very different ideas about what Daniel should play. The showcase is excellent publicity, Wellington said, pacing around his office while Daniel sat uncomfortably in an expensive leather chair. I've already spoken to several journalists who'll be covering it. This is our chance to really establish your brand. Our chance. Your brand. The words made Daniel's skin crawl. I think you should play a medley, Wellington continued, not noticing Daniel's discomfort. Something accessible. Maybe some Gershwin, some lighter classical pieces, the kind of thing that makes people feel good. Your story is about overcoming adversity, about raw talent meeting opportunity. We want music that matches that narrative, uplifting, inspiring. Actually, Daniel said carefully, I was thinking about playing Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata. Wellington stopped pacing and turned to look at him. That's quite dark, isn't it? Rather intense for what we're trying to achieve. It's one of the greatest piano pieces ever written, Daniel said, his voice stronger now, and it's what I want to play. Daniel. Wellington sat down across from him, his voice taking on a patient, almost parental tone. I understand you have artistic preferences, but you need to think strategically. This showcase will be attended by donors, potential sponsors, media. These are people who can open doors for you. We need to give them something they'll respond to positively. I think they'll respond to good music played well, Daniel replied. Good music, yes, but played smartly. Wellington leaned forward. I've invested a considerable amount in your career. The apartment, the piano, the clothes, the lessons, the connections. All I'm asking is that you trust my judgment on this. I know how these things work. I know it sells. There was that word again, sells. Like music was a product, like art was something you packaged and marketed. Daniel felt something crack inside him like ice breaking on a frozen lake. What if I want to play what I want to play? He asked quietly. Wellington's expression hardened just slightly. Then you'd be making a mistake. Daniel, you're talented, incredibly so. But talent alone doesn't build a career. You need people like me. You need the right connections, the right opportunities. And those things come with certain expectations. Daniel left that meeting feeling sick. He walked home instead of taking the car service Wellington had arranged, needing the cold air to clear his head. When he got to his apartment, he sat at the piano but didn't play. He just stared at the keys, feeling trapped. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How are you, baby? Haven't heard from you in a while. He stared at the message for a long time before responding. Can I come home for dinner tomorrow? Of course, always. I'll make your favorite. The next evening, Daniel took the bus back to his old neighborhood. It felt strange, like traveling back in time. The streets were narrow and cracked. Graffiti covered the walls. The buildings were old and tired, but there was life here, real life. Kids playing basketball in the street. Neighbors calling to each other from windows. The smell of cooking from a dozen different apartments mixing in the air. His mother's apartment felt tiny after months in his spacious place. But it felt like home. She'd made lasagna, his favorite, and they ate together at the small kitchen table that wobbled slightly, because one leg was shorter than the others. Tell me what's wrong, she said after they'd finished eating, and don't say nothing. I know you too well. So Daniel told her everything. About the showcase, about Wellington's demands, about feeling like he was losing control of his own music, his own life, about the choice he had to make between playing what he wanted and keeping Wellington happy. His mother listened. Really listened, in the way only she could. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. You know what I remember? She finally said. When you were 12 and you first heard classical music. You were helping me clean an office building after hours and there was a radio playing, some piano concerto. You stopped dead in the middle of mopping and just listened. You had tears in your eyes. Do you remember? Daniel nodded. He remembered. It was the first time he'd heard Rachmaninoff, actually. The same piece he'd played in Wellington's ballroom. You said to me, Mom, I want to do that. I want to make people feel the way I feel right now. She looked at him with those eyes that had seen him through everything. Is that still what you want? To make people feel something? Or do you want to make people comfortable? Because those are two different things. The question hit him hard. She was right. Great music wasn't always comfortable. It challenged you. It made you feel things you didn't want to feel. It broke your heart open and showed you truth. That's what Beethoven did. That's what the Appassionata did. I want to make them feel, Daniel said. But Wellington invested so much in me. I owe him. You don't owe anyone your soul, his mother said firmly. Money can be repaid. But if you lose yourself, if you let someone else decide who you are and what you create, you'll never get that back. What if he cuts me off? What if I lose the apartment, the piano, everything? She reached across the table and took his hand. Baby, you learned to play on a broken keyboard. You practiced on paper. You taught yourself from videos. You didn't need all those fancy things to be brilliant. They're nice to have, sure, but they're not what makes you who you are. Daniel felt tears burning in his eyes. I'm scared, Mom. What if I'm not good enough without all his help? You were always good enough. That's why he wanted you in the first place. He didn't create your talent. He just gave you resources, but the gift was always yours. That conversation changed something in Daniel. The next morning, he went to see Dr. Vasquez in her office at the conservatory. She was reviewing sheet music when he knocked. "Daniel, come in. I was just thinking about your showcase piece. I want to play the Beethoven," he said without preamble. "The Appassionata. Mr. Wellington wants me to play something lighter, but I want to play what I want to play." Dr. Vasquez set down her papers and looked at him carefully. "This is a big decision. Wellington won't be happy." "I know. He might threaten to pull his funding." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Then she smiled, and it was a genuine smile full of pride. "Good. It's about time you stood up for yourself. You think I'm doing the right thing? I think you're doing the necessary thing. An artist who doesn't have the courage to fight for their vision isn't really an artist at all. They're just a performer of other people's wishes." Dr. Vasquez stood and walked to her window, looking out at the conservatory grounds. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. "When Wellington first approached me about you, I wasn't the only one he contacted. There are several foundations that provide scholarships to talented young musicians. I know because I sit on the boards of 2 of them. We all wanted to help you, but Wellington moved fast. He made his offer before anyone else could." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you've had other options all along. Wellington made sure you didn't know about them. He wanted you to feel like you owed him everything, like he was your only chance." The revelation hit Daniel like a wave. All this time he'd thought Wellington was his only hope, his only way into this world. But there had been other doors. Wellington had just closed them before Daniel knew they existed. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Daniel asked. Dr. Vasquez turned to face him, and there was regret in her eyes. "Because I thought maybe it would work out. I thought maybe having a powerful patron would be good for you, help you get established quickly. I didn't realize how much control he'd want, how much he'd try to own not just your career but your art itself." She paused. "I was wrong. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." Daniel sat down heavily in a chair. His whole understanding of the past 9 months was shifting. Wellington hadn't saved him. Wellington had claimed him. There was a difference. "What should I do?" he asked. "Play the Beethoven," Dr. Vasquez said firmly. "Play it because it's what you want to play, what you need to play. And whatever happens after that, we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this, Daniel. You never were." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of intense practice. Daniel worked on the Appassionata with a focus he hadn't felt in months. This piece was brutal, demanding everything from the pianist. It required technical precision, yes, but also raw emotional honesty. You couldn't fake your way through Beethoven. Either you meant it or you didn't. The night of the showcase arrived cold and clear. Daniel stood backstage at the conservatory's concert hall, listening to the other students perform. Each one was brilliant in their own way. A cellist who made her instrument sing like a human voice. A violinist whose technical precision was breathtaking. A soprano who could shatter your heart with a single note. And then it was his turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Daniel Chen performing Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 23, the Appassionata." Daniel walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, but he could see the audience beyond them. Rows and rows of people. Music critics, industry professionals, conservatory donors. His mother sat in the 3rd row, having borrowed a dress from a neighbor. Dr. Vasquez was there too, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And in the back, standing by the door like he might leave at any moment, was Mr. Wellington. Daniel sat at the piano. The instrument was a Steinway, old but magnificent, maintained by the conservatory with loving care. He took a breath, placed his hands on the keys, and began. The Appassionata starts with a whisper, a quiet rumbling in the lower registers like distant thunder. But there's tension in it, a coiled energy waiting to explode. Daniel played those opening notes with the weight of everything he'd been through, every compromise he'd made, every time he'd played music he didn't believe in, every moment he'd felt like a puppet on someone else's string. Then the explosion came. The music erupted into furious, cascading runs. The left hand and right hand chasing each other in desperate conversation. This was anger. This was pain. This was someone fighting for their soul. Daniel's fingers flew across the keys, but he wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He was thinking about truth. about freedom, about what it cost to be yourself in a world that wanted to own you. The second movement brought a moment of peace, but it was fragile, haunted, like remembering something beautiful from the past that you can never get back. Daniel thought of his mother's apartment, that wobbly kitchen table playing on paper because that's all they had. The simplicity of loving music for its own sake, before money and expectations complicated everything. Then the final movement crashed in like a storm. This is the part that separates the good pianists from the great ones. The tempo is brutal, relentless. Your hands have to move like lightning while maintaining perfect control. But it's not just about speed. It's about fury, about passion unleashed. It's about refusing to be broken. Daniel played like he was fighting for his life. Every note was a declaration. I am here, I exist. You cannot silence me. The music built and built, wave after wave of sound crashing through the hall, until finally it resolved in a series of decisive, thunderous chords. Final. Absolute. Uncompromising. The last note rang out into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The audience sat frozen. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the entire hall was on its feet, applause thundering as loud as the music had been. People were crying. Daniel could see tears on faces throughout the audience. His mother was sobbing openly, not bothering to hide it. Dr. Vasquez was standing too, clapping with her hands above her head, her face glowing with pride. And in the back, Mr. Wellington stood very still, his face unreadable. Then slowly he turned and walked out of the hall. Backstage afterward, Daniel was surrounded by people. Professors congratulating him, fellow students, even the ones who'd whispered about him, coming up to shake his hand. A music critic from the city's major newspaper asked for an interview. A representative from a concert series wanted to discuss booking him, but the person Daniel wanted to see most was his mother. She found him in the crowd and wrapped him in a fierce hug, not caring that important people were watching. "You were magnificent," she whispered. "You were yourself." That night, Daniel went back to Wellington's apartment for the last time. He'd already started packing, knowing what was coming. Sure enough, there was an email from Wellington's assistant. Cold. Professional. The arrangement was terminated immediately. He had 1 week to vacate the apartment. Daniel looked around at the space that had been his home for 9 months. The expensive furniture, the Bösendorfer grand piano, the view of the city from the big windows. For a moment, he felt a pang of loss. Then he remembered how he'd felt playing tonight, and he knew he'd made the right choice. Dr. Vasquez called the next morning. "I have news," she said, and her voice was excited. 3 different foundations reached out after your performance last night. They all want to offer you scholarships, plus room and board. You have options, Daniel. Real options. One of those foundations set him up in a modest studio apartment. No fancy view, no doorman, but it was his, and they provided access to practice rooms with good pianos whenever he needed them. It wasn't as luxurious as Wellington's arrangement, but it was honest. There were no strings attached, no performances required at corporate events. Just support for a talented musician to develop his art. The next few months should have been perfect. Daniel threw himself into his studies with renewed passion. He was finally making the music he wanted to make, learning the pieces he wanted to learn. Dr. Vasquez was an incredible teacher, pushing him to dig deeper, to understand not just how to play notes, but why they mattered. But slowly, Daniel began to notice something troubling. Mr. Wellington might have let him go, but he hadn't forgotten. Stories started appearing in society blogs and arts magazines. Pieces about young musicians who became arrogant after receiving help. Articles questioning whether raw talent was enough without proper guidance and connections. Wellington never mentioned Daniel by name, but the message was clear to anyone paying attention. Other students at the conservatory started treating Daniel differently again. Some were supportive, inspired by his stand against Wellington, but others saw him as reckless, someone who'd thrown away an incredible opportunity because of pride. "You could have just played what he wanted at one showcase," one student said, "then gone back to playing whatever you wanted. Why blow up your whole career over one concert?" The criticism stung because part of Daniel wondered if they were right. Had he been stubborn, foolish? Wellington had powerful connections in the music world. What if his influence kept Daniel from getting opportunities? Those fears seemed to come true over the next several months. Daniel applied for several prestigious competitions and was rejected from all of them. He auditioned for summer programs that would have been incredible experiences and didn't get in. Meanwhile, other students with less talent but better connections seemed to glide into opportunities. "It's Wellington," Amy told him one day in the practice room. She'd become his closest friend at the conservatory. "Everyone knows he's still angry about what happened. He's blackballing you." "He can't blackball me from everything," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "He's got a lot of influence," Amy replied gently. "But he doesn't have all the influence. You just have to be patient. Keep working. Your talent will speak for itself eventually." But patience was hard when you watched your peers advancing while you felt stuck. Daniel practiced harder than ever, working on increasingly difficult repertoire. He was getting better, he knew he was. But what good was improving if no one would give him a chance to prove it? His relationship with his mother became strained too, though in a different way. She was proud of him for standing up for himself, but she was also worried. Worried about money, about his future, about whether he'd be able to make a real career out of music without powerful backers. "I'm not saying you should have stayed with Wellington," she told him during one of their weekly dinners. "But baby, the reality is that this is a tough world. Talent isn't always enough. Sometimes you need people who can open doors." "So I should have just been his puppet?" Daniel asked, hearing the edge in his own voice. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I worry about you. What if this doesn't work out? Then I'll find another way. I'll teach. I'll play in restaurants. I'll do whatever it takes. But I won't compromise who I am." She looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "Sometimes I forget you're still so young. You think the world is simpler than it is?" "Maybe the world made it complicated," Daniel shot back. "Maybe it should be simple. You have talent, you work hard, you succeed. Why does it have to be about who you know and who you impress?" His mother didn't have an answer for that. Nobody did. 6 months after the showcase, Daniel was practicing late one night in the conservatory when Dr. Vasquez found him. She sat down and listened for a while as he worked through a Prokofiev sonata, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're getting better. Significantly better. Your technique has always been extraordinary, but now you're developing real artistic maturity." "Thank you," Daniel said, but his voice was flat. "What's wrong? What's the point?" The words came out more bitter than he intended. "I'm improving, sure. But no one's hearing it except the people in these practice rooms. I can't get into competitions. Can't get performance opportunities. Wellington's seen to that?" "Not all opportunities," Dr. Vasquez said carefully. "There's one competition that Wellington has no influence over. It's completely independent, judged by an international panel." The next 4 months became a blur of notes, scales, and endless repetition. Daniel's life shrank down to the essentials. Wake up at 5 in the morning. Quick breakfast. Practice from 6 until noon. Lunch. Practice from 1 until 6. Dinner. Practice from 7 until midnight. Sleep. Repeat. The repertoire for the Tchaikovsky competition was brutal. Contestants had to perform 3 major concertos, any of which would take months to learn properly. They had to prepare multiple solo pieces covering different periods and styles. Everything had to be memorized perfectly. Not a single wrong note could be tolerated at this level. Dr. Vasquez was relentless. If Daniel made the smallest mistake, she'd make him start the entire section over. "At the competition, one mistake can eliminate you," she'd say. "The judges are looking for perfection, yes, but more than that, they're looking for someone who can survive the pressure. Someone who won't crack." The pressure was immense. Daniel's hands hurt constantly from the repetitive practice. His back ached from sitting at the piano for hours. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. He'd wake up in the middle of the night with music running through his head, unable to turn it off. His fingers twitching through passages while he lay in bed. Amy would check on him sometimes, bringing food because she worried he wasn't eating enough. "You look terrible," she'd say with concern. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" "I'll sleep after the competition," Daniel would reply, not looking up from the keys. "You need to take care of yourself." "You can't perform if you're exhausted." "I'm fine," he'd insist, though he wasn't fine. He was running on caffeine and determination, pushing his body beyond what was healthy. But what choice did he have? Other competitors had been preparing for this for years. He had 4 months. His mother visited less often because every visit meant time away from practice. When she did come, she'd find him hunched over the keyboard, his eyes bloodshot, his hands moving mechanically through the same passage for the 100th time. "This isn't healthy," she'd say, same as Amy. "You're going to burn yourself out." "I can handle it," Daniel would reply, though he wasn't sure he could. 2 months into preparation, something shifted. Daniel was working on Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto, arguably the most difficult piano concerto ever written. It's 40 minutes of relentless technical demands, passages so fast and complex that many professional pianists refuse to attempt it. And it all has to be memorized. He'd been working on the first movement for hours, trying to get a particular passage clean. His fingers kept stumbling in the same spot, a rapid series of chord progressions that required perfect precision. Over and over he practiced it, and over he made the same mistake. "Again," Dr. Vasquez said from across the room. Daniel started the passage again, stumbled in the same place again. He tried again, same mistake again. His fingers hit the wrong notes. He slammed his hands down on the keyboard in frustration, creating a discordant crash. "Daniel," Dr. Vasquez said calmly, "I can't get it," he shouted, surprising himself with his own anger. "I've practiced this 1,000 times and I still can't get it right." "Then practice it 1,000 more times. That's not helpful." Daniel stood up from the piano, his hands shaking. "Maybe I'm not good enough for this. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I'm just some kid who got lucky, and Wellington was the only reason I had any success at all." Dr. Vasquez stood up too, but her voice remained calm. "Sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want to quit. I want to go home and sleep for a week and forget this whole impossible thing." "Sit down," she repeated, firmer this time. Daniel sat. His whole body was trembling. He realized he was close to tears, which embarrassed him. Dr. Vasquez pulled a chair close and sat across from him. "Do you know why I agreed to teach you?" she asked. "Why I've spent hundreds of hours working with you when I could be performing, earning money, building my own career?" Daniel shook his head. "Because in 40 years of teaching, I've maybe seen 5 students with your level of natural ability. Maybe 5. You have something most pianists would kill for, but right now you're about to throw it away because you're tired and frustrated and scared." "I'm not scared," Daniel protested weakly. "Of course you're scared. You're terrified. You're terrified that maybe you're not as good as you think you are. That maybe all those people who said you only got where you are because of Wellington were right. That maybe you'll fail in front of the world's greatest pianist and prove you never deserved to be here." Her words hit too close to home. Daniel felt the tears coming and couldn't stop them. "But here's what I know," Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice gentler now. "Fear is part of being an artist. Every great musician I've known has been terrified at some point. The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't isn't talent. It's whether they can push through the fear." "What if I can't?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. "What if I get to Moscow and freeze? What if I forget everything I've learned? What if I prove that I'm not good enough? Then you'll have tried. You'll have given everything you had to something you believed in. That's more than most people ever do." She paused. "But I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to walk onto that stage and show the world what you're capable of, if you don't give up now." Daniel wiped his eyes. "I'm just so tired." "I know. So take today off. Rest, sleep, eat real food. Come back tomorrow fresh. The music will still be here." For the first time in 2 months, Daniel took a full day off. He slept until noon. He went for a walk in the park, something he hadn't done since preparation began. He called his mother and talked about things other than the competition. He ate a real meal, not just grabbing whatever was quick, and when he came back to practice the next day, something was different. The passage that had been impossible before, he got it on the 3rd try, not because he'd suddenly gotten better overnight, but because his exhausted mind had finally gotten the rest it needed to process everything he'd been learning. The remaining 2 months were still brutally hard, but Daniel learned to pace himself. Practice 8 hours, yes, but take short breaks. Eat properly. Sleep at least 6 hours a night. Take 1 day off each week. Slowly, the repertoire came together. The concertos became second nature. The solo pieces gained depth and nuance. 3 weeks before the competition, Dr. Vasquez organized a mock performance. She invited other conservatory professors, advanced students, even some local musicians. Daniel would perform as if it were the real competition, the full program with an audience watching. He was nervous walking onto the stage, but it was a different kind of nervous. Not the paralyzed fear he'd felt months ago, but an alert, focused energy. He sat at the piano, took a breath, and began. The performance wasn't perfect. He made small mistakes, tiny hesitations, but he recovered from each one smoothly, kept going, maintained the musical line. When he finished, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Afterward, Dr. Vasquez gave him detailed notes. That passage in the third movement needs more clarity. The tempo in the second concerto dragged slightly in the middle section. The Chopin was beautiful but could use more dynamic contrast. Daniel took notes frantically, already thinking about how to fix each issue. But overall, Dr. Vasquez said, and she was smiling, "You're ready. You're actually ready." The next week, Daniel received his official acceptance to compete in Moscow. He'd be one of 36 pianists from around the world, the best of the best. The competition would last 2 weeks with multiple rounds. Contestants would be eliminated at each stage until only 3 finalists remained. His mother helped him pack for the trip. She folded his performance clothes carefully. The simple black suit he'd bought specifically for the competition. Not fancy, not expensive, but clean and professional. "I'm so nervous," she admitted. "I know you're the one competing, but I feel like I'm about to take a test." "Me too," Daniel said. "I keep having dreams where I forget all the music. I sit at the piano and my mind goes completely blank." "That won't happen," she said firmly. "You've prepared too well. You've worked too hard. You're going to walk in there and show them what you can do. What if it's not enough?" She stopped folding and looked at him seriously. "Then you'll come home and we'll figure out what's next. But Daniel, win or lose, you've already accomplished something incredible. You taught yourself to play. You got into one of the best conservatories in the country. You stood up to a billionaire who tried to control you. And now you're about to compete at the highest level of classical music, against people who've had advantages you never had. That's already a success. Everything else is just details." The flight to Moscow was long and uncomfortable. Daniel couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop his mind from racing through passages, worrying about mistakes, imagining disasters. When the plane finally landed, he felt exhausted and wired at the same time. The competition venue was intimidating. The Moscow Conservatory's Great Hall was enormous and historic. Tchaikovsky himself had walked these halls. Rachmaninoff had performed here. Some of the greatest pianists in history had played on this stage. And now Daniel was here, a kid from nowhere with everything to prove. The first round began 2 days after his arrival. Each contestant would perform a solo recital, about 45 minutes of music. The judges sat in the front rows. The wait for the results felt eternal. All 3 finalists were brought to a waiting room backstage while the judges deliberated. It would take at least an hour, they were told. Maybe 2. The judges had to review their notes, discuss each performance in detail, reach a consensus. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, trying to process what had just happened. The Argentine pianist, whose name was Sofia, sat nearby doing breathing exercises. The Japanese pianist Kenji paced back and forth, unable to sit still. "You were incredible," Sofia said to Daniel after a while. "That Rachmaninoff, I've never heard it played like that." "You were amazing too," Daniel replied honestly. "That Prokofiev was fearless." "We all were," Kenji added, stopping his pacing. "No matter what happens, we should be proud. We made it here. We proved we belong among the best." They fell into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Daniel's mind wandered to his mother, watching the live stream from home. To Dr. Vasquez, sitting somewhere in the audience. To Amy and the friends he'd made at the conservatory. And yes, even to Wellington, wherever he was, whatever he thought. Finally, after what felt like days but was probably 90 minutes, an official came to get them. "The judges have reached their decision. Please follow me to the stage." The 3 finalists walked out together, standing side by side at the front of the stage. The audience had remained in their seats waiting. The energy in the hall was electric with anticipation. The head judge, a legendary Russian pianist who'd won this same competition decades ago, stood at a microphone with an envelope in his hand. He gave a short speech in Russian, which was translated through headphones for the international audience. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear the words. The judges were unanimous in their opinion that all 3 finalists demonstrated extraordinary artistry and technical mastery. This was one of the strongest final rounds in the competition's history. Daniel felt his palms sweating. Just announce it, he thought. Please just say it. Third place goes to... The judge paused, letting the tension build. Kenji Tanaka from Japan. Applause erupted. Kenji bowed, a smile of both pride and disappointment on his face. Third place was still remarkable, but they all knew what they really wanted. Second place and another dramatic pause. Daniel held his breath. Sofia Mendez from Argentina, more applause. Sofia's face showed pure shock. Second place in the Tchaikovsky competition would launch her career into the stratosphere, but still not first, which meant... And first place, the gold medal winner of this year's International Tchaikovsky competition, Daniel Chen from the United States. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. The words didn't seem real. Then Sofia grabbed him in a hug and Kenji was shaking his hand, and the audience was on their feet again, and officials were coming forward with flowers and a medal, and someone was trying to put it around his neck. He'd won. He'd actually won. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. Photos with the other winners. Interviews with journalists. A reception where important people from the music world congratulated him and gave him their business cards. Everyone wanted to talk to him, to be associated with the winner. Dr. Vasquez found him in the chaos and pulled him aside. She had tears streaming down her face. "I knew," she said, her voice shaking. "From that first night in Wellington's ballroom, I knew you had this in you. But seeing it happen..." "Daniel, do you understand what you've done?" "I won a competition," he said, still in shock. "You won the competition. You know how many careers have been launched from this stage? Ashkenazi, Pletnev, Matsuev, and now you. You're part of that legacy now." The reality of it started to sink in. This wasn't just a medal. This was a door opening to a career he'd only dreamed about. Concert halls around the world would want to book him. Record labels would call. Opportunities that had seemed impossible just hours ago were now within reach. He called his mother as soon as he could break away from the crowds. She answered before the first ring finished, like she'd been holding the phone waiting. "You won!" she screamed before he could say anything. "My baby won!" "I watched the whole thing. I recorded it. I called everyone we know. The whole neighborhood knows. Mr. Patterson at the community center is crying. He's so proud." Daniel felt his own tears coming. "I wish you could have been here, Mom." "I was there," she said firmly. "Every note you played, I was right there with you. I'll always be with you." After they hung up, Daniel found a quiet corner and just sat for a while, letting it all wash over him. He'd done it. Against all odds, against Wellington's influence, against everyone who said he wasn't ready or didn't deserve it, he'd won. The next morning, his phone was flooded with messages. Concert halls from Berlin, London, Tokyo, New York, all wanting to book him. Record labels offering contracts. Music festivals inviting him to perform, and yes, several messages from journalists wanting to write profiles about his journey. One message stood out. It was from the director of the Thornton Conservatory. "Congratulations on your historic win. The entire conservatory community is incredibly proud. We'd love to discuss opportunities for you to join our faculty after you graduate, sharing your knowledge with the next generation of students." Teaching. Daniel hadn't thought about that. But the idea appealed to him. Helping other young musicians who were starting from nothing, who had talent but no connections. Giving them what Wellington had tried to give him but without the strings attached. Another message made him pause. It was from Wellington's assistant. Brief and professional. "Mr. Wellington would like to schedule a call at your convenience to discuss future opportunities." Daniel stared at that message for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to leave that chapter closed. But another part was curious. What could Wellington possibly want now? He decided to take the call. He owed himself that closure at least. That afternoon, Wellington's voice came through the phone, smooth and measured as always. "Daniel, congratulations on your victory. Quite an impressive achievement." "Thank you," Daniel replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I've been following your progress, of course, watching from a distance. I have to admit, I had my doubts when you walked away from our arrangement. But you proved me wrong." Daniel waited. "There had to be more. I'd like to make you an offer," Wellington continued. "Now that you've established yourself independently, I think we could work together again. But differently this time. A true partnership, not a sponsorship. You'd have complete artistic control. I'd simply help facilitate opportunities, make introductions, handle the business side. You'd be free to make all creative decisions." It was a generous offer. Daniel had to admit that. With Wellington's connections and business acumen combined with his newfound credibility as a competition winner, they could accomplish incredible things. But something Dr. Vasquez had said months ago echoed in his mind. The question wasn't whether an arrangement was beneficial. The question was whether it helped him grow as an artist or held him back. "Mr. Wellington," Daniel said carefully, "I appreciate the offer. I really do, but I need to decline." Silence on the other end. "Then may I ask why?" "This wouldn't be like before. You'd have full control." "Because I need to do this on my own," Daniel explained. "I need to know that whatever I achieved it myself. Not because someone opened doors for me, but because I was good enough to open them myself." Another pause. Then Wellington's voice, and it sounded almost respectful. "I understand. For what it's worth, Daniel, I think you're making a mistake. But I also think you'll succeed anyway. You have something I didn't fully appreciate before. Not just talent, but integrity. That's rarer than you might think." "Thank you, Mr. Wellington. That means a lot." "One more thing," Wellington added. "About the conservatory showcase when you played the Beethoven against my wishes. I was angry at the time. I thought you were throwing away your career out of stubbornness. But watching you in Moscow, I realized something. That showcase was the beginning of you finding your voice. If you'd played what I wanted, you might have pleased the crowd that night. But you wouldn't have grown into the artist who could win in Moscow." Daniel didn't know what to say. Was Wellington actually admitting he'd been wrong? "Good luck, Daniel," Wellington said. "I suspect I'll be attending many of your concerts in the future. As a paying audience member this time, not as a patron." After they hung up, Daniel sat thinking about that conversation. Wellington had taught him something important, even if not in the way Wellington had intended. Sometimes the people who try to control you teach you the value of freedom. Sometimes the obstacles in your path teach you how strong you really are. That afternoon, Dr. Vasquez took Daniel to lunch at a small cafe near the conservatory. They sat by the window watching Moscow street life pass by. "I need to tell you something," Dr. Vasquez said after they'd ordered. "Something I should have told you months ago, but I was afraid it would complicate things." Daniel looked up from his menu. "What is it?" "When Wellington first approached me about you, I wasn't the only person interested in helping. There were at least 4 other foundations and patrons who wanted to support you. I know because I sit on the boards of 2 of them, and I heard about the others through colleagues." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "What happened to those offers?" 6 months after Moscow, Daniel's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. His calendar was booked solid for the next 2 years. Concert halls from around the world wanted him to perform. Carnegie Hall, Royal Albert Hall, the Vienna Musikverein, places he'd only dreamed about were now calling him, offering him stages where the greatest pianists in history had performed. But Daniel was careful about which opportunities he accepted. He'd learned his lesson with Wellington. Just because someone offered something didn't mean you had to take it. He chose performances that excited him artistically, not just the ones that paid the most or had the most prestige. He also made sure to stay grounded. He kept his modest apartment, the one the foundation had set him up in after leaving Wellington's place. He could afford something fancier now, but he didn't need it. The apartment was comfortable, and it reminded him of where he'd come from. Every Sunday, without fail, he had dinner with his mother. No matter where he was performing that week, he'd fly back for that meal at their wobbly kitchen table. It was non-negotiable. "You don't have to do this," his mother told him one Sunday evening. "I know you're busy, all that traveling." "Mom," Daniel interrupted gently, "this is the most important thing I do all week. The concerts are wonderful, but this, coming home, this keeps me real." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "Just don't forget to live your own life, too. You're young. You should be out there experiencing things, not always worried about your old mother. You're not old, and I am living my life. This is my life. Music and family. That's what matters." True to his word, Daniel had also started working with the community center. The program had launched 2 months ago with 10 new keyboards, a restored upright piano, and 3 part-time teachers. They offered free lessons to any kid in the neighborhood who wanted to learn. The first day of classes, 30 kids showed up. By the end of the month, they had a waiting list. Daniel taught there himself every Wednesday evening, working with the most advanced students. He loved watching them discover music the way he had, seeing their eyes light up when they finally got a difficult passage right. One of his students, a 12-year-old girl named Maya, reminded him of himself. She had that same hunger, that same desperate need to play. Her family couldn't afford a keyboard at home, so she'd stay late at the center practicing on paper just like Daniel used to do. "Hey," Daniel said to her one evening after class, "I want to give you something." He pulled out his old electronic keyboard, the one he'd bought used after leaving Wellington's apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Maya's eyes went wide. "I can't accept this," she said. "Sure you can. I don't need it anymore. And it's a good keyboard. Someone gave me a chance once, let me practice on their instruments. Now I'm passing it forward. Take it home. Practice every day. And who knows, maybe in a few years I'll be buying tickets to your concerts." Maya hugged him so hard it hurt. When she left that night carrying the keyboard like it was made of gold, Daniel felt a satisfaction deeper than any applause he'd received in Moscow. His professional career was flourishing too. His first major concert after the competition was at Carnegie Hall in New York, sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. The program was ambitious, the same Rachmaninoff third that had won him the gold medal, plus several smaller pieces including his own composition, the one about his mother. The night of the Carnegie Hall debut, Daniel stood backstage feeling those familiar pre-performance nerves. But they were good nerves now. Excited energy rather than paralyzing fear. He'd learned to channel that adrenaline into his playing. Dr. Vasquez was there, of course. She'd flown in to watch, bringing several students from the conservatory. Amy was in the audience too, along with his mother, Mr. Patterson, and several people from the neighborhood who'd pooled money to buy tickets. "Nervous?" Dr. Vasquez asked backstage. "A little, but more excited than nervous." "Good, that's exactly how you should feel." She paused, then added, "I'm so proud of you, Daniel, not just for this performance, but for everything. The way you've handled success. The way you've stayed true to yourself. The work you're doing at the community center. You're becoming the kind of artist the world needs." "I'm just trying to pay it forward," Daniel said. "Help other kids the way you helped me." "I barely helped you," she protested. "You did the work. You believed in me. That helped more than you know." The stage manager called his name. It was time. Daniel walked onto that legendary stage, the same stage where Horowitz had played, where Rubinstein had performed. The hall was packed, over 2,000 people filling every seat. The energy was electric. He sat at the piano, a magnificent Steinway perfectly maintained, and took a moment to center himself. Then he began to play. The Rachmaninoff third was even better than it had been in Moscow. He'd lived with the piece longer now, understood it more deeply. Every note felt inevitable, necessary. The technical challenges that had seemed insurmountable months ago now felt natural. His fingers knowing exactly where to go without conscious thought. The audience was completely silent during the performance, holding their collective breath. You could have heard a pin drop. When the final chord faded away, there was a beat of silence, that sacred moment after great music ends. And then the applause exploded. People leaped to their feet. The ovation went on for minutes. Daniel bowed again and again, overwhelmed by the response. Finally, he sat back down and played an encore, a gentle Chopin nocturne that brought tears to eyes throughout the hall. The reviews the next day were glowing. The New York Times called him a pianist of rare sensitivity and stunning technical command. The Washington Post wrote that Daniel Chen doesn't just play the piano, he makes it sing, laugh, and weep. Classical music blogs declared him the most exciting young pianist in a generation. But the review Daniel treasured most came from his mother, scrawled on a napkin and handed to him after the concert. "You made me cry, not because you were famous, but because you were beautiful. Love, Mom." A week later, Daniel received an unexpected call. It was from the Vienna Philharmonic. They wanted him to perform a concerto with the orchestra at their prestigious New Year's concert, broadcast to millions around the world. It was the kind of invitation that usually went to established virtuosos, not 20-year-old competition winners. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked the artistic director. "I mean, I'm honored, but..." "We're very sure," the director interrupted in accented English. "We heard your Carnegie Hall performance. We watched videos from Moscow. You have something special, Mr. Chen. A combination of technical brilliance and emotional depth that reminds us of the great pianists of the past. We would be honored to have you." Daniel accepted, of course. How could he not? But he made sure to block out time after the Vienna concert for teaching at the community center. Balance. That was the key to not losing himself. As his career exploded, offers came in that tested his principles. A luxury car company wanted him to endorse their vehicles. A watch manufacturer offered him hundreds of thousands to wear their product in publicity photos. A private equity firm wanted him to perform at exclusive events for their wealthy clients. Offering fees that made his head spin, he turned them all down. You could make so much money, Amy pointed out when he told her about the offers. You could set up your mother for life. Fund the community center forever. Maybe, Daniel agreed. But then I'd become something I don't want to be. I'd be selling myself, my music, the same way Wellington wanted me to. Just for more money this time. So what will you do for money? You can't live on concert fees alone, not with all the time you spend teaching for free. I'll make enough from concerts and recordings. It won't be millions, but it'll be enough. I don't need a fancy car or an expensive watch. I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror and like who I see. He did accept one commercial opportunity, though. A documentary film crew wanted to follow him for a year, showing his journey from the community center to the world's greatest stages. The catch: all proceeds from the film would go to music education programs in underprivileged communities. It's not about me, Daniel explained to the producer. It's about showing kids who come from nothing that they can make it. That talent and hard work matter more than money or connections. The documentary, when it was released, became a surprise hit. People connected with Daniel's story, his authenticity, his refusal to compromise his values even when offered everything he could want. It inspired a wave of donations to music education programs around the country. One day, about 8 months after Moscow, Daniel got an email that made him pause. It was from Wellington. Daniel, I've been following your career with great interest. You've accomplished remarkable things, and I'm genuinely happy for your success. I'm writing to make a donation to your community center program. No strings attached. No publicity required. Just a contribution to good work being done. I've learned that sometimes the best investment isn't the one where you maintain control, but the one where you let go and watch it flourish on its own. With respect, Richard Wellington, the donation was substantial, enough to expand the program significantly. Daniel stared at the email for a long time, trying to decide how he felt. Was Wellington trying to buy his way back into good graces,